He didn't even glance at me when I passed him, just walked by, slow and proud, the way men who think they own the room always do. His tailored jacket brushed against my arm, and not even a nod. Not a flicker of acknowledgement. I was standing right there in a dark navy gown, hair pinned tight, glass in hand. I wasn't in the way. I wasn't hard to see. But Edgar Whitman looked right past me like I didn't exist. That's the moment I knew he hadn't figured it out. And that was fine. Some people only learn the hard way. The truth is, I didn't come here to impress Edgar Whitman. I didn't come to play the role of older sister of the bride with a bright smile and polite silence. I came because my little sister asked me to, because she said it would mean a lot to have me there, and because I'd promised myself a long time ago that if Celeste ever found happiness, I'd stand beside her no matter what it cost me. So I smiled quietly and stepped aside to let Edgar pass. Let him think what he wanted. Let him assume whatever he needed to. Because in that moment, I knew something he didn't, something that would hit him like a slap in the face when I finally opened my mouth. But before that, there's something you should know. This story didn't begin with a wedding. It began with a phone call and the kind of silence that rearranges the shape of your world. I was 23 when my father died. Celeste was 18, days away from her high school graduation. We were both supposed to be somewhere else that week. I was finishing my final project for a marketing seminar at CU Boulder. She had her senior prom coming up, and I'd promised to take pictures for her in our backyard under the old maple tree. But then the phone rang at 3:17 a.m., that hour where nothing good ever happens. My college advisor's voice was shaking when she told me there'd been an accident. Just like that, everything collapsed. Our dad was gone. The man who used to leave handwritten notes in our lunchboxes and play the Eagles too loud on Saturday mornings. The man who promised to teach Celeste to drive and help me buy my first car. The only parent we had left. Gone. At the funeral, people kept saying things like, "You're so strong," and "He'd be proud of you." I didn't feel strong. I felt like a cracked cup someone had tried to glue together too fast. But there wasn't time to fall apart. Not when the mortgage bill arrived 3 days later. Not when the bank started calling. Not when a man in a blue vest came to repossess our car while Celeste was still sleeping on the couch. Our father had been self-employed. He'd kept things going for as long as he could. But beneath the surface, there were late payments, unpaid taxes, unpaid loans. He tried to shield us until he couldn't. Within 2 months, the house was gone. The only car we had was gone. The workshop where he built custom cabinets was emptied and locked. All we had left was the duffel bag I'd packed for spring break and a folder of my scholarship paperwork. That night, after the last relative left and the front door clicked shut, Celeste curled up on the floor in my dorm room with her knees under her chin. She looked up at me and whispered, "What now?" And I realized I was the adult now. There was no one coming to fix it. No secret trust fund. No distant relative with a checkbook. Just me and her, and the crushing weight of what we'd lost. I wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and said, "We figure it out." And we did. But the cost was everything. I dropped my last elective that week. There was no time for comparative literature or capstone debates about advertising ethics. I needed a job, any job. So I applied to work the closing shift at a campus cafe and started tutoring freshman econ majors on weekends. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I delivered packages for a local courier service until 1 a.m., then crashed for 4 hours before dragging myself back to class. I lived off black coffee and dollar menu fries, but somehow I kept showing up. Celeste moved into my apartment a month later. I gave her the bedroom. I took the pull-out couch that creaked every time I shifted. At night, she'd study biology flashcards under a lamp that flickered every time the heater kicked in. I kept telling her to replace the bulb. She never did. I think she liked the way it reminded her of Dad's old desk lamp, the one he used when paying bills. We didn't talk much about the grief. It sat between us like an uninvited house guest. But we did what we could: rice and eggs for dinner, thrift store coats for winter. We made it work. I graduated without a ceremony. There was no cap toss, no champagne, just a quiet walk across a nearly empty quad and an email confirming my final grades. My first job offer came from a mid-sized logistics firm, entry-level, back-end operations, nothing flashy. But it had health insurance. That felt like winning the lottery. During the day, I managed shipping schedules and sorted spreadsheets. At night, I cooked pasta and watched Celeste fall asleep on the couch, textbooks open across her stomach. On Saturdays, I let myself sleep in. On Sundays, I clipped grocery coupons. But even in that gray routine, I held on to something, an ember I refused to let go out. I started taking free online courses: systems automation, SaaS integration, database structures. It didn't matter that I was exhausted. I was investing in something I couldn't name yet, but I knew it was mine. Then came the message. It was a Thursday evening. Rain slicked the Denver sidewalks, and my bus was 20 minutes late. I was halfway through reheating leftover curry when my phone buzzed. It was Noah Chun, a guy I barely remembered from my sophomore marketing class. He'd seen my comments in a LinkedIn group about streamlining back-end logistics. "You always had a knack for process," his message said. "We're building something. Want in?" I almost deleted it. I didn't have time for pipe dreams. But then I looked at Celeste, her face lit by the glow of her laptop, brows furrowed as she typed an essay on embryonic cell division, and I thought, maybe this wasn't just about dreams. Maybe it was about building something stable enough for both of us to finally breathe. So I said yes. From 9 to 5, I was Harper from corporate. Blazer, low heels, smile tight. But after dark, I became someone else. I met Noah and another founder, Justin, at coffee shops. We mapped out software architecture on napkins. We borrowed cloud server space and worked off borrowed MacBooks. Some nights, I fell asleep with my laptop still open, lines of Python glowing like constellations across the screen. Money was tight. Justin left after 6 months of failed demos. Noah and I stayed, barely. But then, one client used our prototype. Their processing time dropped by 43%. They told 3 other companies. Suddenly, our inbox was flooded. We weren't ready, but we adjusted fast. Even as the momentum built, I didn't quit my day job. I'd learned early how quickly security can vanish. I saved every spare dollar, worked weekends, answered client support emails during lunch breaks. While Noah spoke at tech panels, I ran quality checks and dealt with server bugs at 2 a.m. I didn't care about press. I didn't care about praise. I cared that Celeste had heat in the winter, working plumbing, a refrigerator that didn't leak, and the ability to register for her second year of college without crying over tuition fees. People thought I was quiet, that I was content with being in the background. But I wasn't silent. I was focused. And eventually the world would hear me. We called it Ardent Flow. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't trendy. But it worked. And clients started noticing. One by one, companies that once ghosted our cold emails circled back with pilot programs, demo requests, and suddenly real contracts. Noah became the public face. He had the charisma, the vision, the LinkedIn presence. And I didn't mind that. I liked being the one behind the curtain. It gave me room to think, room to build. What I didn't expect was how quickly the sharks would start circling. There were offers, big ones, from firms I used to admire in college. One name came up more than once: Whitman Capital. They were known for 2 things: brutal acquisitions and pristine reputation management. Their founder, Edgar Whitman, had built his empire on charm and leverage. I recognized his name from every finance article and conference keynote Noah forwarded me. Whitman Capital wanted us. Or more accurately, they wanted to own us. Every email we got from Edgar's team was polished, persuasive, and laced with condescension. "We believe Ardent Flow shows early promise. We'd be happy to shepherd you into the next phase. I could almost hear the smirk behind the words. I kept declining, politely but firmly. Then, one night, everything shifted. It was a Tuesday in early spring. I had just gotten home from a client onboarding call and was halfway through microwaving leftover stir-fry when Celeste called. Her voice was breathless. "Harper, I have something to tell you." I braced myself. My sister never used that tone unless something big was coming. "I'm getting married." My fork stopped midair. "You're what?" "To Caleb. Caleb Whitman." My stomach dropped. "I know I should have told you sooner," she said quickly. "It's been serious for a while now. I didn't know how you'd react." Caleb Whitman. I'd heard that name before, once in passing, but I never asked. I never thought I needed to. "I want you to meet him," she added. "He wants to meet you too." That part surprised me. A lot of men didn't know what to do with me. They'd see the quiet exterior, the odd working hours, the lack of small talk, and write me off. But this one wanted to meet me. That said something. So I agreed. We kept it casual. I offered to cook. He brought wine and flowers, something bright and springy. His smile was warm, but a little rehearsed. He talked about his job in data science, his love of hiking, how Celeste made fun of his Spotify playlists. I watched him like a hawk, not to intimidate, just to weigh the shape of his soul. And then I asked gently, "Whitman, any relation to Edgar Whitman?" There was a pause. "He's my father." I didn't react, just nodded, took a sip of water, changed the subject. Because if this was who Celeste loved, I needed to understand the full picture. I needed to see the man beyond the surname. Later that night, while she and Caleb were cleaning up in the kitchen, Celeste pulled me aside. "You went quiet for a while," she said. "Everything okay?" I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't nervous. She was radiant. "Steady. You really love him," I said softly. "I do. He's not like his dad, Harper. He listens. He sees me." And that was all I needed. "Okay," I said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then I'm in your corner." Because no matter how many long nights I'd lived through, no matter how many things I'd given up, the only thing that ever mattered was that she would one day stand in a kitchen like this, safe, loved, unafraid. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of that. The formal family meet and greet was scheduled 2 weeks later. Celeste asked me to come, said it would mean the world to her. "Just be yourself," she added with a nervous smile. "And maybe with a dress I like, the dark green one." I smiled and nodded. I would have worn a paper sack if she'd asked. For her. I'd show up wherever, however, because she was showing up for herself. Finally. The event was held at an upscale country club just outside Denver. White tablecloths, champagne flutes, perfectly trimmed hedges. The kind of place that smelled like old money and quiet judgment. I pulled into the lot driving a reliable but dented old Toyota and walked in like I belonged there. Because I did. Inside, people floated through conversations like they were choreographed. Someone handed me a glass of sparkling wine I didn't ask for. A waiter passed with a tray of smoked salmon on mini toasts. And then I saw him, Edgar Whitman. He stood by the bar, surrounded by 2 other men in tailored suits, laughing at something none of them probably found funny. His hair was silver, slicked back with surgical precision. His posture said, "I expect to be obeyed." His smile said, "I've never heard no more than once." His eyes scanned the room like a radar and then landed on me. He looked me up and down, paused, and then looked away. Not a nod, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. Just moved on like I was a waitress who'd wandered too close. I kept walking. I didn't flinch, but inside something shifted. When we were formally introduced 15 minutes later, he offered a limp handshake and said, "Ah, the sister." I assumed her father would be here. "Our father passed years ago," I replied, my voice calm. He gave the smallest nod of recognition and moved on. The conversation drifted toward careers. Predictably. "And what is it that you do?" he asked, not out of curiosity, but out of reflex, like a man trained to assess value in titles and business cards. I work in operations, I replied evenly. Corporate systems automation. He blinked. The disinterest was instant and complete. That was the moment he filed me away. Some people make that decision fast, the one where they decide you're not worth remembering. And that was fine, because while he saw a single woman in her 30s with no wedding ring and quiet shoes, what he didn't see was the woman who had kept his future daughter-in-law alive when no one else did. The one who built a company he was trying to buy without knowing she was already standing in the room. That night, I told Noah about it over a late Slack message. He sent back a single line, "The universe loves symmetry." And I started to wonder, maybe this was all lining up for a reason. The weeks flew by in a blur of dress fittings, floral arrangements, and guest list edits. Celeste kept calling with updates. "We're thinking dusty rose for the centerpieces. Can you proofread our vows?" I found Dad's cufflinks. I want Caleb to wear them. She was glowing in ways I'd never seen. Not the superficial shine of new love, but the deep, grounded kind that comes from safety, from trust. The night before the wedding, she sent me a photo of her shoes lined up next to mine in our childhood hallway. No caption, just that. I stared at it for a long time, then closed my phone and quietly pressed my dress. And in the morning, I stepped into that venue not as a plus one or a distant relative, but as a sister who had survived enough to know exactly when to speak and when to wait. Because my time was coming. The ceremony was beautiful. Celeste walked down the aisle with soft shoulders and steady steps, her bouquet trembling only slightly in her hands. Caleb waited at the altar like a man who knew exactly what he was getting and couldn't believe his luck. The vows were personal, simple, honest. I watched them through the blur of a few quiet tears, gripping the small locket I wore under my dress. It held a photo of our dad. He would have liked Caleb, or at least liked how Celeste looked when she stood beside him. After the recessional, we posed for photos. I stood beside her in every frame, our arms linked, like we'd never fallen apart. We hadn't, not really, just stretched, bent, cracked under life's weight, but never broken. The reception was set in a grand ballroom with hanging lights and soft jazz. People laughed, danced, clinked glasses. I stayed mostly to the edges, chatting with a few familiar faces. I didn't need attention. I was content watching Celeste laugh without fear. And then, out of nowhere, a catering staff member tapped my shoulder. "You're up next," she said. I blinked. "Next for what?" "Speech," she said, smiling. "Mix ready." I froze. There had been no note in the program, no announcement, no request. I wasn't supposed to speak, but someone, Celeste maybe, had slipped my name in without telling me. I could have declined, politely waved it off, but something inside me said no. This was the moment, not for revenge, not to impress, just to say what had never been said. I stood, smoothed the front of my dress, and walked slowly to the microphone. The room quieted. "Good evening," I began. My voice didn't shake. "My name is Harper Mercer. I'm Celeste's sister." Chairs shifted. Silverware paused. Even Edgar, from across the room, turned to look. "I wasn't just her sister, though," I continued. "After our father passed suddenly, I became something else. Her guardian, her emergency contact, her ride to doctor appointments, her college application coach, her shoulder at 2 a.m. I paused, met Celeste's eyes. She was already crying. I was 23. She was 18, and we had no one else. No safety net, no inheritance, just debt, grief, and a lot of ramen noodles. A few polite chuckles, a few uneasy glances. I had just finished college when it happened. I could have collapsed, but she needed rent money. She needed groceries. She needed a future. So I got to work. More shifting. Some people looked down. I kept going. I lost a lot in those years. Sleep, friends, a a relationship I cared about. But I didn't mind, because every time she came home with an or got an interview or smiled without flinching, I knew it was worth it. I let that settle before I added the next part, and somewhere along the way, I helped build something else. A company, a software platform. Some of you may even use it. It's called Flow. Heads tilted, murmurs spread. We started it in borrowed apartments and free libraries. We nearly lost everything. But today, it supports dozens of companies around the country, including a few represented here tonight. Now silence. Absolute. I turn toward Celeste and Caleb. I say this not because I need applause. I don't. I've never needed the spotlight. I say it because stories matter. And this one, it began with two sisters on the floor of a borrowed room, wondering how to survive. And it led here, to love, to late, to both of you. A long pause. Congratulations. I stepped back. The applause was slow at first, then warm. Honest. Not the kind people give out of obligation, but the kind that comes when truth slices gently through a room and everyone feels it. And Edgar Whitman, he stared at me like he'd just watched his own signature slide off a deal he thought he owned. He was pale, and I was finally seen. I didn't make it 3 steps before I felt him. Edgar Whitman moved like a shadow in a tailored suit. Smooth, deliberate, perfectly timed. He stepped into my path with a glass of wine in hand and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Harper was it?" he asked, voice silk-wrapped steel. That was quite a speech. I offered him a calm, neutral smile. "Thank you." He extended his hand. I shook it. Firm, measured, no hint of deference. "You're the co-founder of Flow," he said, less question than realization. I had no idea. I nodded once. Yes. He looked me over again, but this time it wasn't the dismissive scan of a man assessing value through appearances. This time he was recalibrating, piecing together what he'd missed. "Why didn't you say something at the meet and greet?" he asked, almost gently. "When I asked what you did, why not just tell me?" I met his gaze without blinking. "Because I wanted you to see who I was when you thought I was no one." His face didn't move, but his fingers twitched just slightly against the glass. "Fair enough," he murmured, then took a sip of wine that didn't quite disguise the pause in his throat. I gave him a polite smile. "Enjoy the evening, Mr. Whitman." And then I walked past him. Not quickly, not slowly, just steady. One step at a time, the way I'd done my entire life. Toward something solid, toward the people who actually mattered. Noah caught my eye from across the room. He raised an eyebrow as I returned to our table. I gave him the smallest shrug and sat down, my heart strangely quiet. Not proud, not angry, just still. The rest of the night unfolded like it belonged to someone else. Celeste danced like a woman who had no shadows left to run from. Caleb held her close, lips brushing her temple, his hands respectful and sure. The music played on. Laughter swelled. Toasts were made. Edgar didn't approach me again, but I saw him. I saw how he watched Celeste with new eyes, how he looked at Caleb like he was trying to find cracks, how he watched me, curious now, not contemptuous, calculating, but no longer dismissive. That was enough. He didn't have to like me. He didn't even have to respect me, because what mattered was that the illusion had shattered. The assumption had failed, and I had never once needed his approval to stand where I stood. Later that night, as the crowd thinned and the floor dimmed, I found Celeste in the hallway near the restrooms, sitting on a velvet bench with her heels kicked off and her bouquet resting beside her. She looked up when I approached. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." "You okay?" she asked. "That speech," I smiled. "You didn't tell me I was on the list." "I didn't," she admitted. "But Caleb said he wanted them to hear you. Really hear you." That caught me off guard. "He knew about everything?" I asked. She nodded. "Not everything. Just enough. I told him you're the reason I'm here. and he said that should never be left unsaid. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the scared teenager on my dorm room floor. I saw a woman. Whole, loved, safe. I'm glad you found each other, I said quietly. She reached for my hand. Me too. And for a moment, we just sat there. Two sisters. No titles. No audience. No debt between us. Just love. I left the wedding with aching feet, a quiet smile, and no regrets. Back at my apartment, I kicked off my shoes, poured a glass of water, and stared at the little corkboard by my desk. It held nothing fancy, just 2 sticky notes with Celeste's college acceptance letter and a printed-out beta review of Ardent Flow from our very first client. I sat down, closed my eyes, and breathed. Noah texted later that night. Noah, he approached you, didn't he? Me. Of course he did. Noah, did he make an offer? Me, not yet, but he will. Noah, you know what I think. Me, I do. Because we'd had this conversation before. 3 times, in fact. Once when Edgar's team first contacted us through a third-party acquisition firm. Once after Ardent Flow hit 7 figures in ARR. And once after he sent us a direct letter, a printed letter on thick embossed stock, detailing how he envisioned integrating us into his tech portfolio. He used phrases like long-term synergy and exit trajectory. And in return, I sent back one sentence. We're not interested in being acquired at this time. It wasn't spite. It wasn't revenge. It was a boundary. I'd spent too long building something that wasn't just profitable, but intentional. Human. Clean. Edgar didn't understand that. His world was built on margins and metrics, on the belief that everyone eventually would sell for the right price. But I'd learned something far more valuable than that. Respect that arrives only after your resume is read isn't respect at all. And people who can't see your worth until they see your valuation spreadsheet don't deserve access to your work. Edgar had tried to buy us because he thought we were small enough to fold, smart enough to be useful, but too insignificant to matter beyond a line item. He was wrong. Ardent Flow didn't need a buyout. We needed freedom, space to grow on our own terms, space to choose our clients, our partners, our values, space to say no. Ironically, Whitman Capital still uses our platform. They signed a licensing agreement through one of our white label resellers. I don't think Edgar even knows that his own operations team logs into an interface I help design daily. When they submit tickets for system support, we respond. Fast, professional, polite, but never personal. I don't sign emails with titles. I don't mention my name. I let the product speak. The system, the structure, the quiet power of something built, right. And maybe that's the best kind of revenge. Not slamming doors, not public takedowns, but continuing, growing, thriving in the exact places where they assumed you didn't belong. I've never told Celeste about the offers, not because I'm keeping secrets, but because some victories don't need to be shared to be real. They just need to be lived. And besides, she doesn't ask questions like that anymore. She teaches high school now biology, gardens on Saturdays, volunteers at a community kitchen once a month. Her laugh is louder than it used to be, her shoulders less tense. When she walks into a room, she doesn't shrink or second guess. That's what I fought for. That's what all of this was about. Not proving anything to a man like Edgar Whitman, but proving something to myself. That I could take nothing and make something. That I could turn grief into shelter. That I could carry someone long enough for them to find their own legs, and then step quietly aside so they could run. People still underestimate me. At tech conferences, they assume I'm the assistant, not the architect. In boardrooms, they ask if I'm here to take notes. When I introduce myself as Harper Mercer, they nod politely and say, "Oh, I've heard of Ardent Flow. Do you work there?" I smile. I say yes, and let them sit with that. Because the truth is, I don't need them to know everything. I don't need them to Google me or hand me a trophy or gasp when they connect the dots. I've lived in the background long enough to understand something most people miss. The ones who dismiss you when you're quiet are the same ones who scramble to respect you when someone else announces your title. But by then, their respect means nothing. Because true respect isn't reactive. It isn't earned by a mic drop or a balance sheet. It's given freely, quietly when no one is watching. And that's the kind I care about. That's the kind my sister gave me the moment she handed me a slice of cake at her wedding and said, "I couldn't have done any of this without you." That's the kind Noah gives me when he forwards a client win and adds, "Your systems carried this." That's the kind I give myself when I wake up at 5:30 a.m., lace my shoes, and run through quiet Denver streets. Lungs full, heart light, no one watching. The spotlight never suited me. Not because I'm afraid of it, but because I never needed it to shine. The only light I ever chased was the one at the end of our hallway. The lamp flickering as Celeste studied on the couch, her future trembling in my hands. She's not trembling anymore. She's steady. She's whole. She smiles in a way she never did when we were younger, when every dollar came with dread, every semester with fear. She smiles like a woman who knows she's loved, supported, chosen. And that smile, that's the return on my investment. I think back to Edgar sometimes, not with anger, just with clarity. His biggest mistake wasn't underestimating me. It wasn't the limp handshake or the quiet dismissal, or even the patronizing tone. His mistake was assuming that being unseen meant being unimportant. That silence equated to smallness. That people like me who don't speak first, who don't lead with power plays or posturing, are somehow forgettable. But I was never forgettable. I was just choosing my moment. And when it came, it wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was a steady voice in a quiet room. It was a woman standing behind a microphone, holding years of grief and grit in her chest, and choosing to tell the truth anyway. And when the room went still, when eyes turned, mouths parted, back straightened, I didn't bask. I didn't flinch. I just finished what I started. Because the point was never to make them look at me. It was to make sure that when they finally did, I was already standing tall. Not for them, not for applause, but for the girl I once was, and the woman I promised her she would become.